So I've mentioned these protected characteristics a few times now. The discrimination law that we have only protects us from discrimination on these grounds. So the grounds are age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. These all have quite specific definitions. Some of them are quite obvious. I mean, age, it's all the ages. Others, like disability, are a bit more complicated. So again, your further reading will help you to understand it a bit better if you choose to have a look. It's important to remember though that within these, there's no one kind of group of person within each protected characteristic who gets better protection than another. So women and men have the same level of protection. Black people, white people, gay people, straight people, young people, old people. Everybody is protected on these grounds. It's just that you might tend to find that women need to use the protection a little more than men and things like that, which is why you tend not to see as many cases, though there are cases, sex discrimination that go through the courts, where the discrimination is being carried out because someone's a man. But yes, it's for everyone basically. I mean, there's nobody who's a service user or an employee in the UK who doesn't have some form of protection under this Act. Everyone is protected. So bringing us on to mainstreaming, how we actually go about implementing our legal responsibilities in the most in-depth and effective way, basically. It's about making all aspects of equality and ideally also of human rights, which is almost the foundation for equalities, an integral part of everything that we do, basically. It's a constantly developing process, and if we want to start it, we need to have a big commitment to doing it, because there is a small amount of work involved at the start. We also need reflection, to be prepared to say, you know, I don't think we do that well in this area, to ask yourself the difficult questions, to hold your hands up and say when you could do better. You need to be engaged with the people who work for you and your service users. And most of all, you need to take action. If you've spotted something that could be improved, or you've spotted an opportunity to put something good in place that's going to promote equalities, we need to act on that. So it's about routinely assessing the impact of what we do on different groups of people and acting on the results. And it's also about taking account of different needs and perspectives, because that's how we find out whether what we do is suitable for people. That's a kind of very brief overview of what it is. It's also important to remember, I've talked a lot about what we do in terms of being strategic staff in an organisation, but it's a frontline approach as well. It's for everyone in the organisation to take part in. So we need to start out with robust and well implemented policies. For example, an equalities policy, you might also want to have a dignity at work policy. Some people say to me, I don't know why we would need that, we all got on really well. Everybody thinks that until somebody that's just a pure jerk comes to work for you, and then you're like, why don't we have a dignity at work policy? It helps you to reinforce the expected standards of behaviour within the organisation, which in turn minimises the chance that somebody is going to be verbally abused or otherwise discriminated against. We need strong leadership at all levels as well, and I'm not just kind of talking about leadership in terms of pointing people in the direction they need to go in. I'm thinking about ownership as well here, that everybody in the organisation knows that they have a responsibility to take forward the appropriate parts of the work that needs to be done. And to do that, we need a kind of broad understanding of equality at all levels in the organisation. Now, the kind of training that these guys have done with me is not easy to access. It doesn't come around a lot. And when you can access training, a lot of the time it's expensive. So I'm not necessarily saying everybody's got to go out and do a 5-day course or even a 1-day course. There are really, really good tools that you can use that are available for free. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has got what they call a starter kit, and it's kind of like little bite-sized training modules that you can access on the internet. It's free, you can use it any time. You could use it as part of your staff induction. You know, it's not got to be an expensive or particularly time-consuming task to get this understanding building, but it is important. Another important thing is about collecting equalities evidence. A lot of the time this will be through monitoring information, but that's not appropriate in all cases, so maybe it's more an anecdotal approach where all of your staff are attuned to these issues and prepared to report them, so that you can collect a body of evidence that shows you how your progress is going with regards to making your services accessible to everyone and making your employment situation more accessible too. That's what our kind of aim is, and when I'm saying accessibility, I'm not just thinking about in terms of physical accessibility for disabled people or sensory accessibility for disabled people. There are various social and cultural issues in there as well that are almost just as important to think about. And in terms of the way we communicate, accessibility is also a big thing when we think about things like literacy and numeracy. And even just down to things like, have we explained the jargon we're using so that people who even have a reasonable level of literacy and numeracy but aren't familiar with our area of work can get involved in what we're doing, can understand what we're doing. So at the heart of it, really, we want to practice what we preach, because I think in the voluntary sector we're very quick to say how inclusive we are, and generally we are. We do much better than the private sector, and in a lot of cases better than the public sector too, in terms of being inclusive. But it's about being prepared to ask those difficult questions and make sure that we truly are as inclusive as we say we are. Now, mainstreaming, on the other hand, is not like we can get a checklist and say, once we've completed all of these steps, we are the perfect equalities organisation. It doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. And it's also not a list of do's and don'ts, because what's appropriate for your organisation might not be what's appropriate for my organisation or Archie's organisation. And the same is true of the people who use our organisations. We need to have approaches that suit them. It's personal. And it's not a one-off exercise for that very reason. We keep finding new things to build on what we've already done. And the equalities environment is always changing over time. So it's something that kind of builds into the work we already do, if you like. So from that point of view, it shouldn't really be lots of additional work, because what we're thinking about is the standard processes we've got, for example, policy review or monitoring and evaluation of your services or projects. These are areas where it is very easy for us to just take an equalities focus while we're doing this. And that is how mainstreaming works. And over time, as you get used to it, it just becomes another part of what you do. And that is the point where you've truly reached the stage of having mainstreamed equality, because it's now second nature to you and always considered. So from that point of view as well, it shouldn't really be difficult or expensive. Some people worry about, for example, making reasonable adjustments for disabled people. They think, isn't this going to be, something that's going to cost us a lot of money? But in almost all cases, an adjustment you'll be asked to make won't cost you anything, or the cost will be very minimal. For example, you might have a staff member who needs a flexible working pattern to fit in with treatment. You can still get the work done the same way, you're just making things slightly different than they would have been otherwise. It doesn't cost you anything. Or somebody who's coming to a meeting like this might say, can we have the notes in large type? It's going to be very minimal amount of work involved in that. That's the kind of thing you can usually expect. Most of you will probably have done this stuff already at some point, so you'll be familiar with it. But why would we want to do it? Well, we looked a wee bit there about the legal stuff, obviously. But the good thing about mainstreaming is that it actually ensures that the equalities work we do benefits everybody, and not just whoever's the flavour of the month. There used to be a kind of approach that I think was particularly prevalent in local authorities, where they would sort of go, right, we better do something on race awareness this year, and they would do all that, and everybody else would just be, you know, putting their hand up and saying, hello, these services aren't suitable for us, and we want you to say, we're doing the race awareness thing this year, we'll come back to you later. We want to avoid that approach. We don't want to be spending time doing things that have minimal positive impact at the expense of doing things that are going to make a real difference to how people can use our services and get involved in what we do. So that's one of the benefits. Obviously, from that point of view, in making our services easier to access, making employment easier to access, we're helping to improve social justice and inclusion in our local area, which of course is pretty much what the voluntary sector is about, so that fits nicely. But it also helps us to create those effective responsive services that we're so proud of. We understand what people need, we can give them it. And the same in terms of workers. If we implement things like family-friendly working practices, and particularly if we have an open mind to allowing everyone to access some degree of flexibility in the workplace, where possible, we can create much more productive workers, because, you know, if you give a bit, you get a bit back, if you like. And it kind of wider point of view than that, it also helps us with our accountability and transparent decision making. I think we're increasingly aware in the voluntary sector, through the funding restrictions we have and things like that whether we are being funded by local authorities, by grant funding, or even by donations, the work we're doing is done with public money, and people want to know what we're doing with it, especially at this time of recession where everybody's fighting tooth and nail for the scraps that are being laid out. If we can actually show that we have thought very carefully about where we're going with the stuff that we're doing, then that's a good thing for us. And the tools that we look at when we're mainstreaming definitely help you to do that. Of course, that evidence as well will help you to demonstrate any evidence of need you might need to show when you're applying for new funding, or to help you meet the funding requirements you've already got. So that's good. And of course, minimises the risk of that unlimited compensation award against us. Even if you don't get that far, because a lot of claims that actually go to tribunal, by the time you've paid a lawyer, you know, £1,000 or whatever to write several letters and maybe had to pay somebody off a couple £100, you're sincerely out of pocket at that point, so let's not go there. So how do we actually go about it? It's all very well discussing, you know, how great it is and everything, but how do we go about mainstreaming? At the heart of it, we're wanting to think about our services, our functions, policies, projects, practices, employment, all of the stuff that we do basically. All of it. And where we can, we want to monitor these, watch how they operate, come to understand who's affected by them. And then we're reviewing and assessing that impact, preferably involving the people who are affected, service users, staff, etc. And at that point we can review and evaluate the effectiveness of what we do and revise our activities however is needed